Welcome to our weekly Grand Rounds. Before we begin, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to enrich our vibrant community. For those of you that aren't here in person, we've got some really amazing treats to celebrate the professorship. So you've got an hour to come down because there's lots of treats around. So I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Penny Smith in our new professor series. So Penny is not a stranger to any of us, but she went to SFU for undergrad degree, then to U of A for medical school and neurology residency. She completed a 2-year fellowship in MS at the UBC MS clinic, and then worked in Vancouver for a number of years until we were able to get her back to where housing prices are more reasonable. She came back in 2008 to embark upon an academic path, and she's been neurology program director, associate program director, and more recently, she's been the Associate Dean of Professionalism for FOMD since 2017. And I can tell you, she has really brought a lot of practical tools and academic rigor and scholarship to that role. And that was really a big part of how Penny was promoted. But of course, she does outstanding work in MS as well. So that was a big contributor as well. So as you know, she is an MS specialist and has been elected the president of the Canadian Network of MS Clinics since 2021. And she's going to talk about a journey to professorship along a winding path.
Thanks, Norman. Okay, well, happy International Women's Day, everybody. Yay. I said it was synonymous with neurology. So, good morning, friends. I'm excited today to share with you some of my path along academia to professorship. Now, I want to start by acknowledging and admiring those researchers and scholars who are incredibly focused and accomplished in a particular area of expertise. And they build that international recognition and prowess over time on a very dedicated topic. Now, some of us don't have quite as straightforward of a path. It takes us a little while sometimes to find our way. And that's me. And I'm going to share some of that journey with you today. These are my disclosures. Now, I know Norman already did a land acknowledgement, but I wanted to refer people to this link at the bottom of the slide. The top is a standard land acknowledgement, one of many that's offered at the University of Alberta. But this link and video really teaches people about how to personalize our land acknowledgements. And this has the opportunity to create land acknowledgements that are more meaningful in various ways. So in terms of my personal land acknowledgement for today, we acknowledge the experiences of First Nations, Métis, and all First Peoples of Canada within the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, past and present. We recognize Treaty 6, the traditional lands of First Nations and Métis people, with gratitude, because this land has fostered our growth and prosperity as professionals within the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry here at the University of Alberta. So these are my objectives for the morning. We're going to go through some challenges and personal successes that I had in transitioning to a clinician educator path, which was actually challenging for me in many ways. And then I sort of got rolling. And then we'll talk about some successes more as an educator administrator, which is where I've spent the latter half of my career. I'm not going to talk too much around improving care for people with MS and optimizing healthcare delivery, even though that actually comprises the greatest amount of my scholarship and disseminated work. But I'm going to share with you more about professionalism, education, and organizational change for fun. And I'll also warn you, I also have some pictures of my family at various points through the presentation, and I do that for fun because I believe we should have joy at work, and I think that that's professional. So originally, I'm a Surrey girl from the 70s and 80s. At the time that I grew up in Surrey, it was quite rural. My parents emigrated to Canada from New Zealand. My dad was a rural GP in New Zealand and then trained as a neurologist here in Canada. And I have memories of a very structured childhood. I had a father who worked constantly as a community neurologist at Surrey Memorial Hospital in the Royal Columbian for many years. And when he wasn't working, he was gardening. This is a picture of his garden. My other memories are of him reading neurology journals every night with the opera blaring. This is where I come from, and this is what has shaped me. And for a long time, I wanted to be a community neurologist. And I did, in a way, at the beginning. So I finished my fellowship at UBC, and I worked full-time as a community neurologist and practiced at VGH and UBC, and I did a day a week at the MS clinic. I did a lot of stroke at that time. I had quite a bit of overhead, and I was supporting a young family at home. And then I had a fondness for Lower Mainland of BC. So there was a small hospital called Peace Arch Hospital out in White Rock that was really internist run. And I ended up going out there 2 days a week to support those internists as they did that incredible job of providing care. Look at how much driving I was doing. I was working a lot and I didn't see my family a lot. And it was a lot of work. Now we had an idyllic living situation down at Granville Island, but you know, that really wasn't sustainable for me in many ways. I was working a lot and I was getting burned out. And for me, a sign of burnout is irritability with patients, especially those with functional neurologic disorder. So I was really honing my clinical acumen. It was very fulfilling work, but you know, something had to change and I wasn't giving enough to my family at the time. Now I was also getting more involved in medical education. So I really needed to reorient and refocus. And then that's when I really moved back to Edmonton to explore different opportunities and to follow a different path. I moved back to Edmonton to take over that role of program director and then associate program director in medical education. And I moved into an academic path. Now, I think it's safe to say that I did not have the background or the scholarly expertise at that time to really know what I needed to do to be successful along this academic path. So I needed to learn a lot within a short period of time. And I am excited now that we have a different construct as to how we support these junior professors along their way. I think there's a lot more guidance that there was at that time, but also I could have looked into it a little bit more, right, before I signed on to that path. So for the first while, I really became immersed, and I think many of you who are educators will resonate with this, immersed in those administrative roles of being a program director and those day-to-day responsibilities of running a program without any real understanding about how to be scholarly about these educational initiatives. And in retrospect, I made a number of errors. I initiated a lot of changes over a short period of time, and this was necessary because we needed to meet the Royal College standards. But I didn't adequately consult the residents about how we were going to make those changes. And we just kind of initiated them. And the residents really didn't feel in control of their program at that time. As well as we found out later, there was some ongoing mistreatment going on from particular faculty within our division towards some of the residents, and they did not feel safe enough coming forward to us at the time. So we ended up on this provisional approval on an external accreditation by the Royal College, which now I think, you know, that's not so bad actually, compared to where some residence programs are. But at the time, it was really a big thing for me. And I had to, this is one of my biggest leadership growth areas, is that I had to learn to remove my ego from the situation and how to not take things personally, to learn how to cognitively reflect on what had happened and how to grow from that. And as well, I just talked about the fact that I hadn't spent a lot of time in educational scholarship to this point. And so I actually had a much shorter time period to pull myself together in order to be successful and move forward to be promoted to associate professor. I was vulnerable at that time and I had doubts and I was thinking of jumping off this path. And I thank my mentors and my neurology colleagues for really helping me during this time. I was vulnerable, but I needed to regroup, pull myself together in that gentle and blunt way that Barbara Ballerman told me at the time, and be successful. So how does one reorient oneself to get going and start achieving to become academically successful? Well, I really think it's about finding the right teams to build collaborative work, and then saying yes to things that maybe you wouldn't think was within your scope at the time. And when you do that, you open yourself up to opportunities. This is my daughter Jules in the front there. She's in a bike race in Canmore, and that's her teammate Katie right behind her. The two of them are much faster together when they work together in a race compared to when they travel alone. And that's what I needed to do. I needed to find those teams, and I needed to figure out a way to create scholarship out of what I was already doing. So I love creating OSCE stations, for instance, novel OSCE stations. So what did we do? We pulled ourselves together. We made a number of novel OSCE stations. We did pre and post evaluations of those, and then published a number of them on MetaEd portal. I'm going to talk a little bit more around the study we did around sleep deprivation in residents and faculty, because I don't think I actually presented this to our group before. And then talk a little bit about my education scholarship project through the Teaching Scholars Program. And I said yes to some unusual things, such as being the inaugural Curriculum Working Group Chair for the National NMS Research and Training Network. So I was approached by Tina Wolfson, who is a well-regarded MS researcher at McGill, and she had known me as an MS clinician, but also as a medical educator. She asked me to become the inaugural chair of this curriculum working group for the National NMS Research and Training Network, funded by MS Society of Canada at the time. Now, this was an intimidating prospect for me because this was to create a multidisciplinary research training education program for graduate students in MS, all different types. I found this rather daunting, but you know what? I said yes. And that was a big thing for me in terms of creating connections and in successes. Now, this was a huge success and rollout, still existing to this day, and it really has launched many of the careers of academics and MS research across our country, both through the curriculum offered to them, especially career development workshops. It helped to retain these trainees in the field of MS, and as through the networking opportunities that it gave them through the summer schools and the sprint programs. So actually that became a part of my promotion package to associate professor, was to create a curriculum where none existed before and to disseminate that nationally. Now, some of us who are a bit older will remember this decision in 2011, where a Quebec judge ruled that hospitals were violating the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms by failing to protect their employees' health, namely residents doing 24-hour shifts. And Quebec was given a period of time to change the length of shifts to a maximum of 16 hours for residents. Now, this really swept the country, and it raised a lot of questions by residency programs and physicians. And one of the most common questions that I heard from neurology faculty was, what about us? And there were some commonly held views that perhaps residents, being younger, were more resilient in handling the effects of sleep deprivation and performance compared to us poor older faculty. And many felt this was too simplistic of an answer that didn't fully address the greater population of physicians experiencing sleep deprivation whilst delivering care. So my friend Jeff and I ended up setting up a prospective cohort study. The majority of our physicians, we had both faculty and residents participate in the project, and we had them from different call rosters, everywhere from neurology through ICU, reflecting the reality of the call situations that we have on an ongoing basis as specialists. And we gave them a subjective measures questionnaire pre and post the 24-hour period, the majority being on call during that 24-hour period. And then as well, we gave them an attention test called the Attention Network Test that tests the neuropsychological networks that control sustained attention and has been shown to show effects from sleep deprivation in the general population. So this looked at alerting, response to a stimulus, orienting, and conflict resolution. We hypothesized leaving our neurology faculty, that the faculty would perform less well. Well, surprise, we had one of the largest studies on sleep deprivation that's been done, actually, in the literature. And we had a number of faculty and residents, the majority of those doing 24-hour overnight call. And what was interesting about it is that we asked people to estimate their ideal sleep needs, realizing that previous studies in sleep deprivation had given arbitrary numbers of hours indicating sleep deprivation. We felt people had individual needs for sleep, so we tried to account for that through our sleep adequacy ratios. Now, people did report overall that their ideal sleep estimates were 7.3 hours as a mean, which was well within the NIH guidelines of what adults need to feel well rested the next day. But the surprising thing was that the majority of physicians actually started their 24-hour call shifts quite sleep deprived in comparison to their ideal sleep needs. And what we found was that there was no difference in attention performance overall for faculty versus residents post-call, except for those, which was many, who had baseline sleep deprivation at the beginning of the 24 hours. They made more errors in accuracy post-call. So what does this mean, and how do we put actions into place in regard to our call shifts as physicians? Well, in 2014, there were updated federal aviation guidelines suggesting that crew members should have 10 hours of enforced rest periods before they start their shifts. And we suggested that perhaps we should think about being well rested as physicians before we start our overnight call shifts. Now, when you don't know what you're doing, sign up for courses. And I needed to be able to apply educational scholarship to my work. So I participated in the Teaching Scholars program in 2011 to 2012 with Carol Hodgson. And that was what really heralded my professionalism education scholarship project. And that was really around coming from where I was as a program director, where I would hear multiple perspectives of a situation that had occurred between residents and faculty. And I was fascinated by the different views that people had about the same situation, and then the judgments that they applied regarding the other person's professional behavior. And I was able to empathize when I heard these stories from different perspectives with each person telling me the story. So that heralded my big professionalism education project with Carol Hodgson, my mentor, around what we needed to do, looking at fields of medicine and nursing, everywhere from student to practicing clinician, with a goal of developing an educational workshop with case vignettes that we could give in different settings to different audiences. And we wanted to highlight what we call uncertain professional behaviors, because we felt that this was more consistent with common everyday professionalism dilemmas that we experienced. Now, professionalism experts do emphasize the importance of uncertainty in this process of reflection, and this can help in teaching to address the gap between learners' perceptions of professionalism versus the actual professionalism institution and framework. So you can do this, and we wanted to create case vignettes that, again, filled the rubric of what professionalism vignettes would be, which was high quality, relevant, encouraging independent thinking and unique response. So in terms of phase one, we wanted to develop what we call gray or borderline professionalism vignettes. We gave these to a group of education experts and had them rated as to whether these would be good teaching cases. Could we then develop consensus on these vignettes by a group of professionalism experts? And in fact, spoiler, we never did. And could we do this within the professionalism framework of our institution, which at the time we took as the code of conduct for the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, as well as altruism, which is contained within the Canadian Nursing Code of Ethics. So we gathered these case vignettes. That was super fun, where I asked people, can you remember any time in your career where you had questions about your professional behavior or were concerned about the professional behavior of others? We then broke this down. We went through case selection committee, case review committee, and then focused it down to 18 vignettes, and then passed these through homogeneous focus groups along the learner continuum. Now, I could present more of what that is, but I thought it'd be more fun to actually present one of the vignettes. So this is one of the more stark vignettes that we had. A resident makes an error during the procedure of putting a central line into a patient in the ICU. A piece of plastic broke off, migrated to the heart, and the patient has a stroke before any intervention can be done. The resident wishes to speak to the family personally. The staff physician decides against this, speaks to the family himself, and discourages contact between the family and the resident. The resident phones the family without the staff physician knowing of the phone call. So usually then we have a polling that's done in an anonymous way. But just as a show of hands, who finds the resident's behavior professional to phone the family? Anybody? Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. Like, yeah, we have a few people there. Anyone find the resident's behavior kind of marginally professional? Yeah, greater group. And who finds the resident's behavior unprofessional? Anybody? Yeah, a few in the back. Okay. So then typically we go into a conversation around what people voted and why, and they share their thoughts on that. And we look, because actually there was quite a disparity within the room here on this short vignette as to how people find this behavior. Now, what we commonly hear from learners, especially students, is that they are quite authoritarian. This is going against the authority of the staff physician, and you have to do what the staff physician says. And they would qualify this with, it depends. So they would say, well, it depends what that staff physician was thinking, and they would try and give the staff physician the benefit of the doubt in various ways. Whereas the faculty actually thought this was more professional behavior compared to the other groups. And they thought that was because they were very critical of the staff physician's behaviors. So then what we would typically do is show them how this looked from our homogeneous focus groups, showing that the medical faculty thought this was more professional compared to the other groups. Now, as some of the comments, you can see this reflected there, where the first-year medical students think it's subversion of authority, it's selfish, but they all acknowledge the moral distress that that learner must be feeling and the lack of closure that that learner must have. You compare that to the faculty, who really thought this was about being an individual who's deserving of respect, and that at every level, medical student through resident all deserve respect, and that's commendable behavior. So then we have a discussion over how this resident could have done this in a different way and had some closure, yet still kind of tried to respect that idea of authority. A lot about professionalism, education, and teachings are about situational context through use of such vignettes, and this contributes to learning from each other through informal professionalism curriculum. This is what gives us individual reflections and growth to common understandings within an institution, and this has been shown in focus groups of internists, where when we're given these vignettes, we often have unique responses, but we shift those responses when hearing from each other. I still use many of these vignettes today to drive home points. Well, at this point, I was able to go forward to associate, and I was really gaining momentum and rolling along at these various times. So let's talk a little bit more around that. Now, as I said, I've actually had more dissemination and scholarship from my clinical work in improving care for people with MS and optimizing healthcare delivery, but I was promoted through an educator administrator through my professionalism work, through service to the institution. So that's what we're going to finish up with the last few moments here. I would say, however, that when you have educator skills and administrative skills, you can apply that to multiple settings. So there are many projects in here, such as building a novel fatigue management resource for people with MS, and then running our Canadian network of MS clinics, where we have been able to provide scholarly work out of what we've been doing in various ways through the same kinds of approaches. Now we're going to finish up a little bit around professionalism. This has been with the Associate Dean of Professionalism. Some of you have heard me say this before, that I equate professionalism to my garden. This is my garden. Now, most of the time, plants grow well, adjacent to each other, filling in spaces and forming a community of beauty and growth, and everything is balanced. Each plant contributes to the whole. However, sometimes some plants are not able to thrive due to various reasons. Maybe that community is not open to including those plants or integrating them. Maybe another plant is actually crowding them out in some way. So sometimes I have to apply a little pruning to create room for the smaller plants to grow. Sometimes in rare circumstances, I actually have to remove a plant and then maybe plant it a little elsewhere or give it a little bit more room. That's professionalism. This is the professionalism reporting system. Now I'm going to present some concepts and approaches here that are going to come across as somewhat simplistic. But, I think that actually is the skill of us as administrators and as educators, is being able to take complex things and then distill it down into messaging that people can understand and approach it. As well, everything we do here is about scholarly intent. So we do literature reviews where no evidence is there. We actually then create a process and then we evaluate it and then we disseminate it. So that's how we create scholarship out of service to the institution. Sign up for courses. So many of us are not trained as leaders and we need to grow into these roles. I certainly had to. And there are resources to help us. Much of leadership work can feel isolating and alone, and so it's important to develop our skills so that we can do better. So when I asked Dr. Kudimoto, my boss, the Vice Dean, about how we deal with professionalism, he said, well, you just kind of chip away at the edges, which I thought, I need more than that. So it's about having a rubric and an approach, and often these things are done in parallel and at the same time. So it has been shown that if we can aid in reflections and growth in individuals, if we provide them with an overarching clear set of behavioral expectations, guidelines, interventions, and then at the same time, we need to empower those in order to deal with mistreatment and unprofessional behavior on the ground via this no wrong door approach. And then finally, look at really training leaders. So let's go into a little bit about behavior expectations in an overarching way. Through our professionalism bridge plan, we created a faculty definition of professionalism. Now, these are behaviors that we aspire towards on a daily basis, but we also need to incorporate and acknowledge the challenges that our FOMD members experience every day while working. So think about what you do all the time and trying to balance all your professional responsibilities. Maybe you're on the ward, you're getting paged, you're trying to see patients, you're trying to teach learners at the same time, and you need to run down to that administrative meeting, which is very urgent, and you're in a very sensitive family conference and you're trying to figure out how to finish this in time to run down. Well, and we're sleep deprived because we were on call the night before. Or maybe we're a researcher in the lab and we're trying to generate research. We're trying to get that grant in on time, which is quite competitive. We're trying to manage behaviors in the lab. We're trying to teach a course at the same time. So it's pretty incredible that we're as professional as we are most of the time, right? We needed to create guiding values to keep us on that straight and narrow road. And we have guiding values because we as a faculty can't have our own code of conduct anymore. And we have multiple codes of conduct that we are supposed to act within. So we like guiding values because these are things that we can aspire towards on a daily basis, as well as we can use them as ground rules of behavior. And that's how we classify our professionalism concerns, kind of like how we use CAN-MEDS with learners. Now, we created some robust reporting structures, which I'll go through in subsequent slides, but in 2019, during Cole College, I realized that we still had issues around learners reporting. And then I came across this concept of psychological safety. And I realized that our learners didn't have psychological safety in order to feel safe in reporting. So that is where we came up with our psychological safety priorities in terms of the faculty. And look at how large that is. That's too big for my portfolio in addition to what I was already doing. So hence the creation of Mel Lewis's role as Chief Wellness Officer, and then Rob Pulley has done a lot of this work as well around psychological safety and bringing it into focus. Now, a lot of people want to talk to me about measurement of professionalism, and they say, well, it's easy, like if you we should have less mistreatment reports and less professionalism reports if we are actually effectively dealing with mistreatment. Well, actually, referring back to Amy Edmondson's work, when you have a safe environment, a psychologically safe environment, you should have more reports of unprofessional behavior and mistreatment. So ways to get at measurement for this are really through things like psychological safety, which Rob and Mel have done in various ways, and I applaud them for that. I needed to guide our leaders around creating some structure around how we approach professional behavior and mistreatment in various ways. And this, we are built off of the Vanderbilt model. This is common to institutions really worldwide now, but at the time we were early adapters then. And so this is everything from having a cup of coffee conversation regarding isolated concerns, like maybe you yelled at someone in emergency, that's often a point of stress. And then you learn from it, you support the person and you move onward. We have level 2 pattern awareness interventions, which are non-punitive awareness interventions where the leader can check on the person, mostly chairs, and say, what's going on for you? Are you working too much? Are you burned out? How can I help you? How can I support you? For those few people that have continued repetitive behaviors, we will often end up in remediation and coaching plans, which we will offer to up to, maybe 6 to 10 faculty per year through a mentoring and coaching kind of model, where we have them work through modules and then come back to the learners. And we do have a discussion at that level about whether they should be removed from learners during that period of time and then reintegrated back with extra monitoring. And then finally, for egregious concerns or potentially egregious concerns, we can't do investigations ourselves, but we have a duty to report depending on the setting that behavior occurs. And usually that's very serious concerns around sexual harassment, boundary crossing, or actions that are not within the keeping with a career in medicine. Now, very recently, Rob Polly had approached me after he had taken a course on management of people about gaps that he saw within our approaches in the faculty. And he pointed out that leaders spend a lot of time, often years, in this level of engagement, where they're trying to help the same people grow. And this does work for the vast majority of people, especially in finding ways of supporting them and exploring pressures that are impacting them in various ways. But for those small numbers of people who can be entrenched and disruptive to environments over time, we needed to give leaders tools around how to move up this pyramid and approach on top of the levels of intervention already established. This is more in terms of tone and management style, moving through into management of behavior, enforcing expectations, which is then really led by our leaders and our support so that chairs don't have to do this alone. How do we then help people in empowering them to deal with mistreatment? No wrong door. So when I talk to learners and I teach them, we give them options and approach when they encounter behaviors in various ways. We talk about this idea of doing nothing and letting it go, which often learners will try and skip over actually into the more active interventions with mistreatment. And I usually draw them back to that and I say, wait a minute, let's talk about this, because I think that this is actually how we've dealt with it a lot of times in the past. So it's important to talk about. And in fact, this might be the safest option for those learners in getting themselves out of that situation and then moving on with their lives. But if you do that, if you do nothing and let it go, then recognize that we have no chance as an institution to try to intervene with that individual or with the situation and try to make things better. We talk about ideas such as approaching the person. We are familiar with the idea of calling out in the moment, which is a little more public and confrontational, but can engender reflection in the person. We don't suggest this for learners, for medical students, for instance, if they're dealing with a faculty person, perhaps this is not their best option. We can also call in after the moment, where you say to the person, I don't know if you noticed, but in that meeting, when you made that statement, everyone kind of stared down at the floor and everyone became really quiet afterwards. And I think people just kind of got a little bit disengaged. Let's talk about that. We talk about the importance of supporting those who experience mistreatment, of believing what they had gone through and then how to support them. We talk about this idea of no wrong door, where they can have learners that approach different avenues for reporting their situations because they will feel comfortable in pursuing kinds of different routes. We talk about learning from professionalism from each other, using vignettes, such as what I presented a little bit earlier. And we do have an apology template in the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry because actually we do have people that have had professionalism concerns or mistreatment concerns who have wanted to apologize to someone such as a learner afterwards, and then we encourage that. Now, with Daryl Rolfson, we have really tried to socialize this idea of no wrong door supports in reporting with medical students over the past few years, recognizing that learners will reach out to the supports that they feel most comfortable with. And Cheryl has been a big part of this as well, and the teachings that we've done with the medical students and the resources that she offers through the Office of Advocacy and Wellbeing. We have always had named concerns, which is the original types of concerns that existed when I took over the role of professionalism dean, where people put their names to a report to go forward with a letter to their supervisors, which is usually a chair. You know, this can be difficult for some people in that they feel vulnerable in putting their names to such reports. So we ended up expanding this to increase safety of learners over time. And our most common method of reporting now is third-party reporting, where we have a trusted faculty person or a leader in some way reporting on behalf of a learner or a group of learners in order to increase safety of those learners in various ways, to try and avoid that retaliation, which is a real fear that people have when they approach us around mistreatment reporting. And we used to take anonymous concerns and then just log them and not do anything with them. But over time, we have expanded that into moving forward with anonymous concerns. But we, first of all, vote on this as our professionalism triage committee on two things. Is there something constructive in terms of feedback that could be given to that individual or that group based on the report that's been given, to try and avoid the retaliatory anonymous concerns that might go through when someone just does something you don't like. And then we also have, we also vote as to whether the anonymity of the reporter can be retained during the reporting process. And this is really important because sometimes we'll have students write in and do an anonymous report, but say, at 2 p.m. on Friday, I was talking to Dr. So-and-so on this ward at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. And so we are limited in moving forward with that, well, because. Now, having these anonymous concerns has actually been really helpful for many of our leaders because it offers them a chance to check in with those individuals and then figure out what's going on in some way. So it's been a good thing. And as well, the other setting that we have anonymous concerns about are, for instance, when there's a lecture and someone says something or does something in the lecture that where we'll often get like 10 or 12 anonymous concerns about the same lecture. And then that's really helpful to us because then we can go back to that instructor and we'll say, you know what, like, yeah, just regarding this one part of your lecture, I think your messaging went wrong. Let's talk about how we can do that better. And then how do we aid and train leaders in professionalism and mistreatment and psychological safety, although that's a little beyond my portfolio, even though I help out with that, in order to have them do this better, because leaders say that this is one of the trickiest things that they have in terms of learning how to deal with it, and that there's definitely a learning curve that they go through. So I know we have a really great mentoring program here in the Department of Medicine, but not all departments have that. And I was dealing with faculty in different areas and helping them grow in various ways. And these might be people who are experiencing mistreatment or professionalism conflict and trying to figure out how to maximize their careers despite these challenges. These could be people who are subjects of professionalism concerns, who maybe are having some struggles in terms of their teaching impact in various ways. So how do we do this in aiding these faculty members in navigating a path to a successful career? And I went to Ramona Carney and Mandela, who previously ran our mentoring program. And they had similar thoughts around the same thing. So we then created this Helping Hands mentoring program, really expanding out the idea of mentoring to really any sort of challenge that people might be having in their careers in various ways, and how to maximize that career impact, integrating things like EDI sensitivities and psychological safety, and then building on those pillars of research, teaching, clinical activity, and service to the FOMD. So this has really taken off in recent years. And leaders have asked for a long time regarding building their skills in various ways because we don't have Gold College anymore. So how do we support them in these tricky kinds of situations around how to help with groups and how to help with individuals in different ways? So Mangela has really led the steering committee around creating a leadership series where the first cohort is ongoing at this time. Now, I have to say, the course is not over, but I think it's a tremendous success so far. Our cohort is incredibly engaged. It's actually a really fun group to be a part of. They're very thoughtful and cerebral. And the plan is to run this leadership series on an annual basis. So I would encourage people to reach out, and this can be emerging leaders, established leaders, people who are just thinking of trying to develop their leadership skills in various ways. Because often a lot of leadership feels isolating and alone, and you're not alone. So how do we create a community together so that we can support each other to do better? And then Mel and Rob have really been instrumental in creating this FOMD Leadership Index, which really looks for leaders at ideas around psychological safety and then how to support these leaders in various ways around what their strengths and challenges might be, and then how do we apply resources to help them. And I've been lucky to be a part of that with Shana Ross, who's a coach who's been hired by our faculty. So we did roll this out for chairs in recent months, and we will be expanding this into divisional directors in future months. And then finally, just a call out to Dr. Eniola Salami. One of the most exciting aspects of leadership for me is to how to use my position to increase the recognition of brilliant leaders, such as Eniola. So this came directly from the Anti-Racism Task Force calls to action in 2021, where one of their calls to action was that they wanted to create a parallel and independent racism reporting structure. Now, why would you do this when we have a professionalism and mistreatment reporting structure already? Well, that is based on the idea that it is important to specifically name racism in order to deal with it. And acknowledging the multi-layers of racism from individual, interpersonal, group, and institutional, systemic. So we've created this parallel racism reporting system, which actually took a lot of work between talking to grassroots groups, individuals, leaders at Central University of Alberta, and this launched in 2022. There are some things that are specific to the idea of racism, such as the fact that there's no such thing as a misunderstanding or miscommunication with racism. There are no oops moments in racism. People were offered a support person and advocate as a part of reporting a racism experience, and we have found this to be very, very important because the trauma of experiencing racism is so targeted and hurtful, especially then in the re-trauma of trying to report it in various ways. We give people the options of reporting single events through environmental, and we necessitate an education intervention as a part of the process. So where to go from here? Well, we've done a lot of stuff, right? Yes, we still have a high prevalence of mistreatment within the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry, but I also think we have greater recognition of it, and I think we're playing catch up with some entrenched behaviors and shifting our culture in recognition, follow through, and accountability. I think where the strength is now is that we have increasing awareness and we have champions on the ground at every point. And that is, I think, what will make the biggest difference in the end, is what we're doing on the ground with each other. And can we get rid of mistreatment altogether? I would say yes and no. I think regarding some aspects of mistreatment, we will always continue to make some errors. And I'm thinking about microaggressions at this point. But it's about creating a space around us where people within the learning workplace feel safe in calling us out or calling us in at various points. As we make those errors, we learn, we do better over time, and we create better workplaces. And here I have to thank my neurology residents who call me out multiple times a month and help me grow. So at this point, I'm going to pivot again. My professionalism theme term is coming to an end. The future is bright. I'm optimistic about it. My dad, the old crotchety community neurologist, always said that a person should do something a little bit different every 5 to 10 years to keep life interesting, and I'm right on track for the timing of those career shifts. So I'm finishing my dean term. I'm going to miss my friends and my colleagues in the dean's office, but I'm excited for the next stage in personal and professional growth. I'm moving on to other things. I've already been asked to join some exciting MS research teams using my educator and knowledge translator lens in various ways, and it's a great opportunity. I require a lot of emotional support. These are all the people that I have to thank because I have been surrounded by so much wisdom and support and along this journey. I thank them all. Thank you.
Probably the fullest I've seen. I don't know if it has to do with the cupcakes or the topic but it really was inspirational. So thank you, Penny. That was outstanding. So I'll kick it off and just, sort of, I guess I've had the opportunity to have conversations with you about this, but just for public consumption. The biggest challenge as leaders for us is those areas of gray professionalism where, particularly, I guess I'll use your gardening analogy, where you talk about pruning and just moving that little that plant to allow the other one to grow. We don't always have the opportunity to do that when individuals don't necessarily have insight into how their behavior is impacting others. Whether or not we agree that it is a professionalism breach or not, we all, recognize that if it's impacting someone else, we need to acknowledge it. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, for me as a leader. Do you have any thoughts, insights to share around that?
No, you really hit it on the head there, the challenges of insight. And we've especially encountered challenges and insight around racism when we've tried to meet with various people around how their behaviors and statements have come across to others and how others have experienced that. You have to have a little bit of a growth mindset in order to accept these things, to internalize them, and then to grow from them. And then you have to seek out racism, for instance, is like the biggest personal growth area for me, actually coming from a racist upbringing with parents from rural New Zealand. So I think it's really hard. And I think for these people, number one, we first of all have to give them the opportunity to try. There's always people that surprise you, and you don't lose ground by meeting with them, raising this as an issue to them, and then going back to them later and saying, this is still an issue. Like, this is a repetitive nature of a process. So I think sometimes we make some wins with those people and gaining momentum with them in terms of understanding and growing. But for those that are completely entrenched, this is where I think we have to talk about, do we actually remove them for a period of time? And then we're encountering this right now with a couple of people in the greater faculty that are having quite entrenched behaviors. And I think it gets to that idea of marginalization, which we are loath to do as institutions, about how do we limit the toxicity that these people are giving to the environment. Very few people. I think what we're now talking about is removing them for a period of time as a cooling off period, without any sort of remediation or coaching or nurturing during that time, and saying, okay, you've got a bit of time to figure it out because we've tried to educate you and it hasn't worked out. So take some thought. And then if you come back and you keep doing this again, then do we talk about whether you even want to be a teacher in the end?
Yeah. And I think that works when it's so blatant.
Yeah.
It's the
gray.
Yeah. But it's not an easy question by any means. Janet.
Yeah, I think certainly as a DD, what I often experienced was people would come to me with concerns, and then I would say, have you brought this up with the individual? And the answer was inevitably no. And I think that has to do with the medical culture, that we are taught to revere the people who came before us, who are higher than us or whatever, and that we do not call out our colleagues because there's that thin blue line, like the police. And I think that how do you how do you think professionalism can approach this going forward so that we all feel comfortable having a conversation, not necessarily to penalize, but to help us all be better?
Mhm. We actually do. It's funny, I do get random emails from various people within the Faculty of Medicine and Dentistry who are struggling with that very thing about not wanting to report something. But then how do they frame a conversation with that individual around how this affected them and then talking to them about it? And so I think that's in that secret of calling in and calling out. And I didn't show more about that because we had a limited time period today, but how do we set that up in various ways, and how do we set up that conversation? And often what I'll end up doing is talk to them about how they would introduce that topic. We often use the crucial conversations kind of rubric for that, like this is the story I'd tell myself, this is what affected me out of what happened in that situation. And then I've actually served as a practice where we role model it, and then they run through the conversation with me, and then I send them on their way and I say, okay, check in with me afterwards and let me know how it went. So I'll give an example with a younger female faculty who had approached me about going to a TGIF, and it was right after the pandemic. And she had a senior male colleague come over to her and say to her, "Can I kiss your hand?" And she actually physically backed up a little bit and she said, "No, I'm not comfortable with that." And then he grabbed her hand anyway, and then he kissed it. And then he put his arm around her, and she felt very uncomfortable with this whole interaction. So, but she didn't want to report it. She wanted to talk to him herself. So then I said, okay, well, how would we raise this conversation with him? Do you want to practice it together? I'm going to be him. And that was kind of fun. And and then she went off and she had the conversation again. He's probably a little entrenched, like tossed it off, like this is not, I am who I am, I'm just a nice, good guy, and, you shouldn't take any offense at what I'm doing. So I think there's still work to have on that. I think it's still a hard conversation, but I think that's how we can support each other through those types of conversations. And I do think we need to have more of those. Because one of the challenging things about mistreatment is that it's based on the view of the recipient, right? Which is really what you talked about there. And one of the things I'll say to people when they say, oh, people shouldn't take offense at what I'm doing or saying, like it's just me, like as if it's somehow the recipient's fault that they have taken it this way. And then I say usually it's a physician, and I'll say, how do you approach your patients? If they are sensitive, if they take something that you say the wrong way, do you adapt your approach? Do you apologize and then adapt to what their needs are in that clinical encounter? And invariably they will say to me, oh yeah, I do. I'm like, oh, well then why wouldn't you do the same for people in your environment, like learners and colleagues and things like that? So sometimes reframing it in that way can help, but you're right, still an ongoing issue.
I would just say in Janice's light, I think it's so much more powerful when it's the conversations between two individuals rather than coming from, so I think we need to do a better job empowering people to be able to have
it. Is better in the moment. So I'll give you an example. A colleague said to me in front of all the learners, okay, so this is my example of sort of trying to make light of the situation, but making clear it's not acceptable. In front of all the learners, a colleague came up to me and said, if you're cute and nice to me, I will write the admitting orders for this patient. And I looked at him and said, look at this face. Are you really saying that? And he kind of walked away, and they came back about half an hour later and said, oh my God, I don't know why those words came out of my mouth. It was the stupidest thing. And I said, but I wanted to say it so that the learners heard it's not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Michelle Graham has quite a few stories as well, similar to that. So Rob has that I'd like to hear from, and then I'm just.
So Mel has a nice construct as well, we're getting to Rob there, around how to call in and call out in various ways. And then she has it around making a joke, being direct, and that kind of thing. And I didn't show it because of time, but yeah, Rob.
So thanks very much, Penny, for a fabulous presentation and congratulations. I have to say on a personal note, I've learned a tremendous amount from you, and I really look up to the value that you have brought to our group in the Dean's office. I think we're all incredibly indebted to the work that you have done and have led. I'm wondering, sort of my question to you is whether you could comment on your experience with the weaponization of professionalism and whether that's something that has been a concern and whether that's something that sort of more reporting, the wider-spread use of the professionalism button, whether that's something that you've seen and how.
You might have to kind of repeat the question.
Yeah, so Rob was asking about the idea of weaponizing professionalism, which actually we've seen in so many different kinds of ways, Rob. It started off with the medical students, where we had medical students who were having professionalism challenges during their training that were highlighted as lapses. And then they started writing accolades for each other and then automatically getting a letter of an accolade as to their exemplary professional behavior, which they would then present to the Associate Dean of UME. And so we had a lot of trouble around this idea of this, like, it was really clever, creating an accolades for each other to counter any sort of professionalism lapses that have been tagged by their instructors, for instance. So for that, we had to have some talks to the medical students, and for a while, we actually suspended them being able to give student-to-student accolades. And then after a few years, after the cohort had moved on, we were able to reintroduce this back without the institutional memory. That's one way. We often have, so if a learner, for instance, actually does get a challenging, constructive feedback, every once in a while, most learners are amazing at receiving constructive feedback, as we know. But there are the occasional learner that will suddenly fire off like what appears to be a retaliatory anonymous professionalism concern. And so that's why we have that vetting of those anonymous concerns to try and like put that into context in various ways. And then it's a funny thing, but when we have these people that are super entrenched, that are repetitive, have repetitive challenges with professionalism and mistreatment of various people around them in their environments, they often seem to have really thin skins. So when you confront them about their behaviors, then often they interpret that as bullying. And they say that you are unprofessional for bringing this up to them. And then they counter and they become very aggressive in their response, saying that they're being bullied and they're a victim. Donald Trump is a good example of that at an extreme level. But so then how do we deal with these people? And again, it comes back to the strength of saying, well, actually, it's not about you, right? It's about the impact of the behaviors that you have, moving back to observations, and then having the strength and support for that leader as they move through the attacks that they receive as a result of trying to actually have that challenging conversation and accountability to that individual. So it's not perfect. We've had it in various kinds of ways. Yeah, it's a challenge.
Just in the last minute, I love this question that Adrian asked, which was that, did you personally have this sort of moment where you talked about focus, where it was sort of, okay, this is the route I'm going to take and I belong here? Just to share with the group. Or was it just kind of a constant?
You know what? I haven't had an epiphany moment throughout my career. I'm somewhat of a shifting individual. So it's more about what comes out of me from left field. And I think, you know what? I actually want to try this for a while and take it. And so someone asked me a few weeks ago about whether I felt ready for the next role that I'm going to take on in life. And I said, no, I don't feel ready. And I've never felt ready for any of the roles that I've taken on in my life, including motherhood. But have I grown into those roles every time? Yes, I have. And I believe that I will grow. So I don't have that. I think it's about responding to what you have around you and growing. I know that there are people who have these amazing moments of belonging, but I haven't had that. But I have had in a great group.
I was gonna say, I think that's an amazing answer on this International Day of Women, because I suspect a lot of women have that sort of, you know, and men, but
Yeah.
particularly women.
And each time I've actually kind of been pushed, right? Like the working group for the NMS Research and Training Network, I didn't volunteer for that. I was pushed.
Like
I was actually pushed to apply for the professionalism dean role. I have each time it has been suggested to me. I have not come up with it on my own.
So I didn't plant this, but for people who didn't look at our newsletter this week, there's a great article that I've cited from Dr. Berna Yu, who talks about the tapping piece. So important. On behalf of the department, Penny, congratulations and thank you so much. So nice to see people out, and please have a cupcake and have a wonderful day.